Grab some popcorn and a favorite chair. The love of movies is why we're here. Press play and don't delay. Let Phil be our guide to a cinematic day. Phil at the movies, from the silver screen to his podcast stream. Phil's covering every movie dream. Phil at the movies. Phil at the movies.
And welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of Phil at the Movies. I, of course, am your host, Phil Walsh, and you were listening to episode number 183 of this ongoing podcast that is, you guessed it, For the Love of Movies. And we are at the beginning of my favorite time of year, spooky season. Yes, this is the first episode in October, and I thought it would be more than appropriate to talk about a series of movies that is very near and dear to my heart, and I know very near and dear to the heart of my guest here. Today, rather than a full-on movie review, I am joined today by author Andrew Grevas, who has written the new book, Horror in Haddonfield, The Untold Stories of Halloween. Now, let me just begin by saying, I thought I knew everything there was to know about Halloween, about the series. Uh, I picked up some new facts and tidbits in this particular book. So as a lifelong fan, I was ecstatic just from what I was able to take away. It's a wonderful read. It's done in a style that is very conversational. The interviews with a number of important Halloween dignitaries, including Daniel Harris, just to name one, are fascinating and insightful. And today, Andrew is going to join me. We're going to talk about the book, talk about the writing process, and Halloween in general. So without any further ado, Andrew Grevas, welcome to the show. Happy to have you on.
That might have been the best introduction ever.
I do
Thank
what I
you.
can.
I appreciate your kind words, and I don't know how to follow that. Have a great show,
All
everybody.
right, all right, we're done. We'll see you next week, guys.
No, thank you. I'm really excited to be here and super happy to be talking about the book today.
So one of the questions that I love to ask people whenever I'm discussing Halloween and Michael Myers, it's a simple one, but I always love to know the stories. How did you first become interested? What is your Michael Myers story? Do you remember the first time you saw the film? What was that like for you?
I do. I'll backtrack to slightly before my first time seeing Halloween. When I was 5, I realized that I like to be scared. I sat down in the living room with my mother. She was watching a television show that some of your listeners might be familiar with. It was called Twin Peaks, and it was originally airing in 1990, 89 or 90. I get the dates a little confused. But I sat down with her as a 5-year-old and watched it, and I realized that I like to be scared. So I started seeking out things that were a little spooky at a pretty young age. And when I was 7 or maybe 8 years old, my cousin and I realized that his parents had a recorded VHS copy of Halloween in their basement. They had recorded it off TV. We sat down in the basement, keeping the volume low because we knew that our parents would not be happy that we were watching this. And we watched the whole film, terrified. And my love of all things horror had already begun, but really got kind of kicked up a notch that day.
That's exciting. There's something about discovering this movie for the first time. There's sort of almost like a forbidden fruit nature
Hmm.
to it or something. I mean, I've told the story a few times on the show before, but the first time that I saw this film cover to cover, it was in January of all times. It was on like a Friday night movie special on AMC. For some reason, it wasn't a part of Fear Fest or Monster Fest that particular year. And I just remember seeing it was going to be on at like 11 o'clock on a Friday night. And I was away. I knew that. And so this are the days where you had the VHS and you plugged it in and
Hmm.
recorded it. And I remember immediately coming back the next night and just like sitting alone in the dark and just being enamored with the
Hmm.
TV edited version of Halloween. And I mean, ever since then, I've been obsessed with Michael Myers, much like Dr. Loomis, I guess.
The obsession is easy to consume one, that's for sure.
That's right. It doesn't stop. What do you think it is about Michael Myers, about Halloween, that we as an audience, and even to an extent, general audiences, I mean, I'm not just talking about the fans, what do you think it is that fascinates people with this series, with this character? Is it the holiday or is it something more?
I think the holiday is a part of it, but Michael is ambiguous enough to where we can each have our own definition of who the shape is, who Michael Myers is. Some of us might look at it as a supernatural entity. Others might associate him with just the fears that we have in everyday life. You know, that person that's walking behind you on a dark street. Those kind of subliminal fears start to kick in, and we attach them to the shape. I wrote about this in the first chapter of the book. When Halloween came out, the world was really, really violent. You know, Vietnam was on the news every single night, and we had Charlie Manson just a few years prior, and all these real life serial killers, and people all of a sudden were afraid to hitchhike. Our world was changing, and Michael Myers was the embodiment of all those fears. And I think to some degree, even today, we associate his quiet nature, his creepy, stalking behavior and mannerisms, we attach them to other fears that we already have because he is not as defined as like a Jason Voorhees or a Freddy Krueger or some of these other slasher icons who we know everything about them. We know their backstories and their mannerisms and their punchlines and things like that. Michael's a little bit more of a blank slate, and we can attach our own definitions to him, and that makes him creepier.
Yeah, I think it's that the fact that we don't know what's going on behind that mask. I mean, I think it was uh, Yerwin LeBlanc who was one of the main producers and sort of originators with the first Halloween, who said it's the theater of the mind. It's what we don't know, and that to me, as a creative person, is always more interesting. I don't like
Hmm.
it when we know what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, that sort of was my issue with some of the later Halloween films, or even some of them, the newer ones like the Rob Zombie ones, for example, where they delve too much into the background. And I like it when Michael is a mystery. We don't need to
Hmm.
know other than what happened, that night when he killed his sister.
Yeah, and it does become a completely different movie when you have all that exposition behind it. You know, Rob Zombie's first film was all exposition. There's an interview in my book. It's Patrick Lussier, I'll just go ahead and say it, where he calls it a Netflix documentary. You know, he calls Rob Zombie's Halloween 1 a Netflix documentary, but his Halloween 2 is a completely different film. It's abstract, it's art, it's unlike anything else in the rest of the franchise because he was free of that exposition. I drastically prefer Rob's second film to his first, which I'm in the minority there, but it's a pretty strong feeling of mine.
Well, I respect that. It's sort of like I'm pretty much alone on an island when it comes to Halloween ends. I get that.
I also love ends.
There we go. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm not totally alone. No,
No.
it's there's something about it. We definitely can get into that one
Mm.
in a little bit. When you think of Michael, do you see him as a man? Is he the boogeyman? Is he something in between? I mean, he's famously been called the Shape, referred to
Mhm.
that in the script numerous times. How do you see Michael? Is this just a guy, or is it something in between?
I, prior to working on the book, I always saw him as the boogeyman, the shape, something mythological. Working on the book, that idea was challenged quite a bit. You know, certain filmmakers did not see Michael that way at all. And I would take on their ideas and their thoughts and their feelings and kind of run with them. And you realize just the lack of continuity with how Michael is treated throughout the films. In Halloween 5, he is a flesh and blood man. You know, he takes off the mask, he sheds a tear, he's displaying emotions completely different than Halloween Ends, for example, which is much more mythological and ambiguous, and we can kind of apply our own themes and definitions there. So, me personally, I think I prefer to look at him as the boogeyman, but that idea has been challenged by some of the things that came up from talking to these filmmakers.
That actually brings me to a great point because the Halloween 5 has always had a soft spot for me. It's sort of the ugly stepchild nobody wants to claim.
Mhm.
It comes between 4 and 6, which there's defenders obviously on both sides of that equation, but Halloween 5 sort of gets left alone. As the kid that nobody wants to go trick or treating with. But I really was fascinated with your interviews with regards to that film, particularly something that I was not quite aware of to the extent that Deborah Hill had involvement, not necessarily in a direct, she was writing the script, but she was instrumental in sort of the hiring of Dominique Arthur-Gerard,
Mhm.
as well as sort of some of the, shall we say, the more controversial elements with the script. And, again, anything that kind of ties things back to either Carpenter or Hill is always going to be fascinating with me. And to learn that she had some kind of indirect involvement with that film was something that one I didn't know, but I also makes me look at five in a totally different light now, as opposed to just how I've always sort of viewed it as sort of this sort of gothic or fairy tale adjacent version of Halloween. But now to know that she sort of had her signature on it in a way is I mean, to me it makes it even that much more fascinating.
One of my goals for the book was to find out new Deborah Hill stories.
Mhm.
I wanted to spotlight her. I feel like it's very easy for us to give credit to so many other people in the franchise, but she often doesn't get her fair shake.
Mhm.
I was not expecting those stories from Dominique. When it came up, I was like, that was not part of my notes.
Right.
I did not know that was coming. So it was a blessing to hear those stories because it was just so out of the blue. But it's unique and interesting because she was not involved with Halloween 4.
Mm.
So for her to kind of step back after the rights were sold with 4 and then come back to help with 5, I found deeply fascinating. I wish Mustafa Akkad were here because those are the kind of story or questions I would like to ask of him. Like, why did you bring Deborah back? What was that process like? And I don't think we'll ever know because they're both deceased. But if anything, we've added some new questions to the Halloween mythology and lore with some of these interviews.
Well, no, I mean, certainly fans of the series will know before she and Carpenter sold their rights in the series, there was an original version that they were preparing for Halloween 4, which would have had Michael return, but in a much more almost ghost story like atmosphere. Think of like The Fog as
Hmm.
an example. And now knowing kind of what she was involved in behind the scenes, that really correlates with what we know was going on with the Halloween 4 script originally and kind of gives kind of that what if of this maybe this would have been the direction things would have gone had they stayed involved and not sold off their
Yeah,
rights with it.
it's another great what if, and
Yeah.
there are certainly a lot of what ifs when you talk about this franchise.
It's the pick your own adventure series in a lot of ways,
It is.
to say the least. Um, Another fascinating point that also jumped out at me, and feel free to elaborate on this because I know we discussed it a little bit off air, um, was the interview you did with Sherm Bitterman, who originally had written a treatment for Halloween 4, and it's interesting because there's a lot of similarity, shall we say, with what ultimately became the final film, The Return of Michael Myers. Talk to me about that particular interview, and are there more questions that you would like to follow up? Because I know obviously the interview was cut short, so I'm sure there's probably more that you want to ask
Yeah.
at some point.
There was. Shem and I are on the phone, and I had made a deal with his agent that I would interview him and review a film that he was working on at the time in exchange for him to participate in the book. Sometimes you make these deals, and they're mutually beneficial. So it was a very long night on the phone with Shem. And we get to the point where he blows my mind with this information. And he's walking through his house and like pulling up his old file folders and reading his old notes. And I'm asking him these questions as he's going through all these old notes. And he's reading to me this treatment of Halloween 4. And it's very, very similar to what we eventually would see on screen from Dwight Little and Alan McElroy. And my mind is just turning and just like all these questions are coming out. And he stops me because he wants to take time to read his version of Halloween 4 and his version of Halloween 5. Something changed. He, I guess, just didn't want to continue the conversation. I'm not really sure why, but we never got to finish. But I do have a lot of questions. But I also am equally as curious about his version of Halloween 5, which would have had Danielle Harris as the central villain.
Yeah, that's always a fascinating what if as well. I mean, people sort of talk about, oh, they should have followed through with the ending on Halloween 4 and had her become the new Michael. And I always sort of, wonder, are people really sure that's what they would want? I mean, based on the reaction to Corey Cunningham, I'm not really sure a 9 or a 10-year-old running around as a junior Michael Myers probably would have gone over well. I mean,
No, it
hindsight.
wouldn't have.
No, that's why I've always sort of been skeptical that that would have been a lucrative end to go with. But again, there's always that, hindsight is 2020, I guess. Um, what interview fascinated you the most? Or I guess what surprised you? Again, you interviewed a lot of different people. Again, not just sort of the heavy hitters. There was a lot of sort of people you wouldn't necessarily it would be first to come to mind. So it's a very in-depth look at this series. So was there anything that just sort of like, oh my God, this was a rabbit hole I didn't expect to go down, or something that really still sticks with you all these years later?
The Shem Bitterman interview is probably the most surprising one to me. Other than that, I think Paul Brad Logan threw me for a loop a little bit with some of his responses. One of the things, and I don't think this is giving too much away for people who haven't read the book yet, is just about like the creation of the three Blumhouse films. And I had a certain thing in mind about the planning and preparation for those three films, and I was wrong. So I'll try to be kind of vague there, but my expectations were completely shattered when speaking to Paul. And th that was a fun thing for me because I think a lot of times that I've done my homework and I'm completely caught off guard by an answer, and then I have to adjust on the fly. But I very much appreciated that. And I think the Paul Brad Logan interview is one of the best in the book. Halloween Ends certainly has its detractors. It's not the most popular film in the franchise, but I hope people who didn't like the film give that interview a chance because I think it might change their mind a little bit, or at least get them to look at the film again.
Yeah, as I said, I've been on the island alone for a almost 3 years now. So when I got to that part of the book, I was like, okay, yes, just love that personal vindication, for this film. Um, why do you think Halloween ends? This is a debate we're probably going to have until the end of time. Why do you think that movie didn't work for a lot of people? Because I'm of the mind that people are right for loving it and they're right if they don't love it. So
Mhm.
what do you think went right or went wrong?
I think what went wrong for some people, and this is not an opinion that I share, but understanding the reaction of others, the marketing told them that it was an epic confrontation between Laurie and Michael that was going to conclude their story. And we got a detour with Michael's apprentice. That was unexpected to them. Michael was old. Michael was depleted. He wasn't the same villain that they'd spent the last 40 years with. That caught people off guard. They wanted to see an epic showdown. Perhaps the marketing didn't do the film justice in that sense.
Yeah.
I think that's a totally valid explanation or plausibility if people are upset by that. You know, they had an idea of what Halloween Ends would be and it did not live up to it. For me, I thought it made total sense. The Blumhouse trilogy is recreating Halloween 1, 2, and 3 in its own image.
Yeah.
Halloween 2018 kicks off the story. Halloween Kills and the original Halloween 2 are the same film. They are the same film. We could go on and on about the similarities there. Season of the Witch did not work in 1981 or 82, I believe, for all the reasons that have been talked about for decades now. But they had the right idea to steer the story away from Michael Myers. Halloween Ends was attempting to fix the mistakes from 1982. How do you move the story away from Michael Myers? How do you make the worldview bigger for this franchise? They absolutely had the right idea, but again, just like in 1982, people were not prepared for change. People wanted more of the same. As horror fans, that's something we're guilty of. We don't want our franchises to change. People rejected Jason Goes to Hell because it was a body horror film instead of a slasher. I love Jason Goes to Hell. I think it's a great film. I'm in the minority there, but people wanted another slasher at the Camp Crystal Lake. They didn't want mythology. They didn't want new. Halloween was attempting to do the same thing here, add to the story, expand the worldview of the franchise, and people rejected it.
Yeah, I mean, I still believe, much like Halloween 3, this film will see a renaissance in the years to come. It may not be, for another 40 years, but
Mhm.
justice for Corey Cunningham. That's all I can say.
I'm right there with you. And I will also lump Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 into that because I think it's a bold film that tried to explore trauma in ways that we weren't comfortable with. It looks different, it feels different. It's a harsh film, it's a heavy film. Um, it's not the same as Season of the Witch and Halloween Ends, but its attempted objectives are similar, and the reactions from the public were similar.
Right. No, that is very true. I mean, I have my issues with the zombie films, but I can at least respect what he was going for, particularly in the second one, because I think that is clearly his vision. That's how he
Mhm.
saw Michael, that's how he saw the whole story. And I mean, again, I'm always going to tip my hat when somebody is willing to put forth a vision that may be sort of different and go against the grain in a way, because we don't see
Yeah,
that all the time.
we don't. And David Gordon Green and team did that with Halloween Ends. I applaud them for that. Tommy Lee Wallace did that with Season of the Witch. Dan Farrens did that with The Curse of Michael Myers. I applaud the creativity. My Rob Zombie Halloween 2 story, though,
Yep.
I hated the film. I absolutely hated the film. And when I started working on this book, I groaned out loud when I had to rewatch it. And I was like, I don't understand why people like this movie. I knew there was a group of people out there who liked it, so I watched the film a second night in a row. And I still didn't like it. But this thing was happening in my head where I had to understand it. What am I missing? I watched it a third night in a row, and the ice was starting to thaw a little bit, and I was like, I'm doing it again tomorrow. I watched the film 4 nights in a row, and I had this moment where I was like, I get it now. I get what he's going for. I also did the same thing with Resurrection, where I watched it 3 nights in a row, but I never had an epiphany with that one.
No, that I have a private joke with some of my friends that that's the Halloween that we do not mention, the Halloween that shall
Uh,
not be spoken.
Fair enough, fair enough.
But I mean, more power to you for trying that 3 nights in a row.
Yeah,
That's a strong constitution there.
a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice for this book.
You know, as I said to you, evil talks tonight, I guess. Um, you spoke to a lot of big names within this book. Obviously, Daniel Harris. Um, what was that like? Just sort of connecting with her, because obviously, I mean, next to Jamie Lee and the late Donald Pleasance, I don't think there's anyone who's as important or impactful with the Halloween series as Daniel Harris. And I know many people will sort of put her kind of as the top tier
Mhm.
face of the franchise. Feel free to just sort of elaborate on that discussion and sort of her overall. connection with the franchise, past and maybe in the future. I mean, who knows what is coming down the road.
Danielle, I felt the same way prior to speaking with her. You know, her importance to this franchise cannot be understated. And it's not just from what she's done on screen, it's also what she's done at conventions. It's what she's done on social media. She has become this face of the franchise because she's like us. She's a horror fan at the end of the day, and she understands the importance of horror fans. Sure, it's a job to her, but she does value the horror community. She values the journalists, the podcasters, and she's a very genuine person. If you're sitting down talking to her, you're getting her undivided attention, and she appreciates the fact that you care about her films. Makes her a little bit different than some other big stars who might view these things as a have to.
Mhm.
Danielle wants to. I did not know that prior to talking to her, but I've struck up a friendship with her. I've talked to her several times since that interview. She's checked on me to see how the book process was going. She's a very sweet person. Offered a lot of support. She's the one who got Scout to do the interview for the book. It's one of my favorite stories. I was mid-conversation with Danielle, and she's like, "Do you want me to text Scout?" And I was like, "Sure." And it happened right there. She's like, "Oh, she texts back. She'll do it." So, it was just kind of a cool thing there. But my personal style when I interview, you know, I'm not the most charismatic speaker. I'm not, sometimes I stumble over my words, but I can build a relationship.
Mhm.
And that is my style of journalism. When I'm interviewing you, I'm trying to create a connection. What do we bond over? What do we have in common?
Mhm.
Dwight Little and I are both Ohio guys. You know, so we spent the first 10 minutes talking about growing up in Ohio, even though we're not the same age. Danielle and I had children in common. So we were talking about being parents. And that's this icebreaker to where you're starting to feel like you know each other. And it's not just question, question, question. You know, we're developing a little bit of a bond. She got a call from her son's school mid-interview because he threw up in class. And we were laughing about that. You know, we took this 20-minute detour mid-interview where we were just talking about weird things that our kids have done. So that's a kind of an insight into her. You know, she's very down to earth, and you can have these kind of conversations with her. A lot of off the record stuff that I don't want to get into, but I'll just say that she very much cares about this franchise. It's important to her. The character is important to her. How people view that character, even when she's not the one playing and playing the character in a film, means a lot to her. She's friends with J.C. Brandy, who took the role in Curse of Michael Myers, but she was very protective over how that character was handled. So I appreciate that about her. Scout is the same way. You know,
Mhm.
Scout very much cares about the Laurie Strode character and the Halloween franchise. And we had probably an hour-long conversation about films that she was not in, you know,
Mhm.
just where she was talking to me as both a fan of the genre and also somebody who has an intimate knowledge of the Laurie Strode character. And we're just kind of going back and forth on things that we agreed on and didn't agree on with other films. I find that deeply fascinating when these actresses and actors as well care that much about the rest of the franchise, the films they're not in.
Mm. No, I mean it's sort of it's a nice look at the whole package because I mean, yes, granted these are jobs and you know you're doing it for that sake, but it's also really heartwarming, particularly for fans to know that these people really do have an invested interest in this franchise or you know any
Mhm.
franchise, but it definitely goes a long way towards sort of making it all feel like home. I mean, that's something that I've always sort of associated with the Halloween
Mhm.
series. There's a homey quality to it. I mean, even though it is the most, you know, it could be over the top and graphic and dark and unsettling, there is a feeling like you're going home with it, whether it's with just sort of the interactions that you can have with some of the cast and crew or just sort of the overall vibe to these films because there's sort of that uh, you know straight out of film school
Mhm.
mentality that I mean it really has kind of carried through even to the more recent films.
Absolutely. I mean, Dominique speaks about that with Halloween 5. He was a pretty inexperienced filmmaker. when he made that. He learned a lot about this industry working on Halloween 5. We all associate Halloween 1 with this love of filmmaking, straight out of film school kind of feeling, but it's much more than just Halloween 1. A lot of filmmakers in this franchise were that way. A lot of the on-screen talent were that way, where they were new in their careers. Ellie Cornell talks a lot about that. Kathleen Kinmont talks a lot to me in the book about that. I'm fascinated by these things, the on-the-job training and learning and things like that, and how that shapes the rest of their careers, how they look at future jobs based on their experiences on the Halloween film sets.
Yeah, I was really surprised by Dwight Little's um, discussion where, this is again the fourth film in the franchise. This is meant to be the return of Michael Myers. Dwight Little, by his own admission, he wasn't a big name director coming onto this film, but yet Mustafa Akkad was willing to take kind of a gamble on him and trust him. And I'm fascinated that, they met with all these different actresses in, I think it was Los Angeles, to try to
Hmm.
find Rachel, but he wasn't satisfied. And so they literally flew him, I think, to New York or somewhere to, meet with other actresses. And it's just, you can't even begin to wrap your head around a franchise today taking that kind of time and energy and sort of gamble on an unknown director
Yeah.
just because he has a vision.
That's Mustafa Akkad for you.
Mhm.
That's one thing that I've never had the pleasure of speaking to him, but I feel like I know a fair amount about him just from speaking to these people that knew him. And he cared, Mustafa cared about these films. He cared about this franchise in a way that not every producer cares about the films. To him, it was not just financial. This was something that had great significance to him, to where he would put that kind of trust and faith into a young director. Hey, let's look across the country to find your leading lady because you couldn't fight the right one out here. That's pretty rare. Dan Farrens tells a lot of stories about Mustafa Akkad. Chris Durand has a really, really funny story about Mustafa. I won't share that one, but it's the fun and one of the most funny stories in the book.
Yeah, I was tickled reading that. So that is definitely one that fans are going to appreciate. I can tell you that. Yeah, he's like a guy you want to sit down and just sort of shoot the shit with for hours
Yeah.
on end.
Yeah. I'll tell you, Chris Durand's interview was one of my favorites in the book, and Brad Loree is similar,
Mhm.
but the book I feel is a little bit like Baskin Robbins. It's all these different flavors. You have the emotional interviews, you have the funnier interviews, you have the interviews that are a little bit more salacious. But those two gentlemen that both played Michael in respective films, it was like film school talk. The
Mm.
way they're describing filming their scenes and what goes into choreographing these scenes, how these things were shot. Both of them go into great detail on stunt work and the art of stunt work that I felt added this whole new dimension to the book. Both of those interviews happened pretty late in the game, too.
Mhm.
So my book was expanding and taking on new shapes, like really up until the very end because of gentlemen like those two.
Obviously, there's never enough time. There's never enough, uh, request. Is there anybody who you would like to interview for maybe a sequel book? I mean, obviously, you probably want to take a break from Halloween for the time being, but certainly, there are other people out there. Who would be a get for you, and what would you ask them?
I got very close with several people, particularly from the Blumhouse films, that didn't happen at the last moment. They're busy and in the prime of their careers and working, and the older cast, might not be going from job to job to job the way that newer cast members are from the more recent films.
Mhm.
And it was unfortunate. The only one that I will name because I think he'll be okay with it would be James Jude Courtney. We literally went down to the last day that I was submitting the book and we were playing phone tag and he could not get back to me in time. And he made the joke that in horror, you always come back for a sequel. So when I write the sequel to let him know and he will be the first interview for the sequel. That's not me guaranteeing that I will do another
Right.
book, but if I do, he will be the first person I interview.
No pressure, Angel.
No, no pressure.
You know, one trip to Haddonfield is probably enough for a little bit.
For a little while.
Yeah,
Joe Chappelle was probably the other one that I really, really wanted. He's so elusive. Nobody talks to Joe Chappelle.
I've
He,
heard that.
I tried. I got closer than I thought I would. I talked to a few people who know him well, and I was putting my hooks in, and it seemed like at one point in time he was interested, but then it just kind of fell apart. That was a big one for me just because nobody's done it. You know, obviously I'm not a huge name author. I didn't have like this incredible body of work behind me when I started it. So I knew I wasn't going to get John Carpenter or Jamie Lee Curtis or even Rob Zombie, but I tried. I tried everybody. I would love to speak with those people. I think Rob Zombie would be one just because I would love to see how he feels about the reception of his films all these years later.
Hmm.
2007 and 2009 were when his two films came out. Some years have passed. You know, the cultural conversations around his two films are changing.
Hmm.
How does he feel about that today? Things like that would be of great interest to me. Um, John Carpenter obviously would just be a blast because he's like the connective point from A to Z in this franchise. He was still a part of Ends, even though he wasn't behind the director's chair and he wasn't on set every day. He's still a part of this world still. So that would have been interesting. Obviously, Jamie Lee would have been a blast, but um, one other scoop that I will give you, and I think I've only mentioned this one other time. I did interview Greg Nicotero for the book,
Mm.
lost the audio. It was the most devastating
Uh,
moment of my life. The audio was gone. Greg and I could never reconnect. And he had a lot of great Halloween 5 and Halloween H2O stories that I would love to try to recapture one day, but I could not type them from memory. So,
that's too bad.
yeah, that
The,
was a
j-
huge bummer.
the joys of technology, right there.
Yes.
Well, I
Zoom
get
failed me.
yeah. That's never fun. That's never fun. Well, like I said, for the sequel, there's always a Halloween too.
There's
Uh,
always a sequel.
yeah, no. On that idea of sequels, and your book touches on it a little bit of the unrealized, the unmade Halloween films. Were there any of the almost made projects that, if go back in time, put you in the director's chair, you would have said, "Yep, let's green light this one."
There's several. A lot of those Halloween 4 scripts that were being tossed about, like the rock and roll one in Chicago, always
Yes.
sounded super interesting to
Yep.
me.
Yep.
Um, the After Resurrection, I feel like is kind of this interesting point in the franchise because that's essentially when they gave up and said, let's reboot. We don't know where to go, let's reboot. But there was a script that was pretty close to being made where the John Tate character would have come back, Busta Rhymes would have come back, it would have been set in a cold location. That one was always really interesting to me because John Tate was kind of this logical person to take over, I think that would have been fascinating. I also would have liked to seen the Patrick Lussier, Todd Farmer Halloween 3D. I think I've had the pleasure of reading that script. We talk about it some in the book, but Patrick sent it to me and I sat down and read the whole thing in one night, and it was a really fun read. Much different than Rob Zombie's films, but still in that same spirit, kind of picking up where his H2 left off, and that would have been an interesting one, but obviously it never came to be.
Right. Yeah, I mean that there's we always sort of joke about it's pick your own adventure uh series, but I mean in a lot of ways, I think that's what sort of makes Halloween that much more interesting and kind of more fun than a lot of the other ones because yeah, if you like the original 1 through 6, you've got that. If you
Hmm.
like 1, 2, H2O, some people will include Resurrection in that. You've got that. You've got the Blumhouse trilogy. You have Halloween 3 all by itself. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot to pick from this particular series, and I think that's what sort of, in a lot of ways, has made it timeless. Whereas a lot of Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, they sort of feel dated or of that particular era,
Yeah.
whereas Halloween seems to almost escape the Grim Reaper, if you will.
It's true. One of the things that drew me to Halloween when I sat down and said, I'm going to write a book. The story there is my buddy Scott's a publisher. He published this book and he was texting me one day, like, when are you going to write a book? It's time, write a book. And I was coming up with a few different ideas. And what really drew me to Halloween was that for some people out there, their grandparents saw the original film at the drive-in in 1978 and their parents grew up with Danielle Harris in the 80s, and whatever incarnation they watched on TV, they could be streaming the new films on Peacock as they come out. But Halloween has crossed at least three different generations at this point. You could sit down at Thanksgiving dinner and talk to your grandmother about her Michael Myers experiences. There are families that could do that now. That to me was interesting. It's become this connective tissue in our society as we get more and more streaming channels and different forms of entertainment, we become a little bit more spread out. We're not all watching the same things anymore. Halloween connects us.
Mhm.
I found that to be very interesting. So that was part of what drew me to this mission.
I like the idea of Halloween being a Thanksgiving table conversation. I'm gonna borrow that from you. That's a
Um,
good one.
It is for me at least.
No, that honestly, yeah, no, I mean, I'm sort of the instrument that brought Halloween into my family's orbit. Some might say, begrudgingly, but such is life, I guess.
It's true.
Someone has to start it somewhere, I guess, which is fine. Um, Actually, since you mentioned the writing of this book, and this is really more of a detour, but what would be your advice to aspiring authors, writers? I know we have a number who listen to this show. Uh, what would be your suggestion for anyone who's looking to do what you did, either again do a nonfiction route or something fictional altogether?
It's going to sound rudimentary, but it's just to do it, to commit to it and do it. That's the hardest part. Creative people have ideas. That part is easy for us as creatives. The following through and the not being down on yourself and discarding the ideas is the difficult part. I wanted to abandon this book multiple times when it got too hard, when the rejection started pouring in, when people were bailing at the last minute, or when I was comparing myself to all the other wonderful books out there.
Mhm.
And I had to remind myself that I just needed to do this. And my ideas were somewhat unique. People are going to enjoy it. But no matter what, I was doing it for me. I was writing this book because it was something that I wanted to write. So it sounds basic and rudimentary, but just the act of following through with the idea is the important part. And then the social media and stuff like that's a whole nother avenue. I'm so sick of overly self-promoting my own book, but unfortunately, when you're a no name, you have to.
Well, yeah, again, we're happy to do what we can here because I mean, I just will shout it from the rooftops. I mean, th this was a wonderful book to read, but I'm even more drawn to it, I think, because you're a first-time author, and I think that's just incredibly cool. And I applaud you for that, for just doing that.
I really appreciate that. It was a lifelong goal. It's something that I've wanted to do since third grade.
Wow.
And I am 40 years old right now. So it took me quite a while to finally do it, but I accomplished that lifelong goal. So,
No, I mean it's never too late. I mean we're really tripping over the cliches with that one. To tie it back to Halloween, I guess like Michael Myers, you may walk slow, but you still get where you need to go, or you get who you want, I guess. Um, on that idea, sort of circling it back to the shape of it all, we're now 13 installments into the series. I know there's rumors of a TV show. There will probably be an inevitable movie again at some point. The infamous Halloween 14. Um, where would you like to see the series progress?
all of the rumors that have come my way, and it's funny because a lot of people that I interviewed for the book assume that I know more than I really do about this franchise and its inner workings. But those conversations have led me to believe that the TV show will all be in the vein of Season of the Witch, non-Michael Myers related stories.
Hmm.
Michael is being saved for the big screen, which I like that. I like other creepy stories in an anthology setting on television. Give the shape his due. With that being said, I think it's been long enough to where they should pivot from ends.
Hmm.
We did that. It makes for a cool trilogy. It does not make sense to me for somebody else to try to pick up where David Gordon Green and team left off. I think it's time to pivot and start a new branch of the Halloween tree. My caveat to that is that it should include some element of nostalgia,
Hmm.
aka Danielle Harris.
Hmm.
It's time to bring back an adult Jamie Lloyd.
I hear that idea more times than I can count, and not just people sort of passing it about. Like you'll hear people within the industry mention that idea, and it sort of seems to me like if enough people are talking about it either in the sort of necessary circles or in the fandom, that almost seems like the direction that things could go. Um, yeah, I could see that happening.
I hope so. I said that to Danielle, I don't know, probably about a year ago. I was like, that's my guess. I see this happening. And her response was, yeah, and they killed Jamie in the first 10 minutes, like Drew Barrymore in Scream. And that made me chuckle.
Yeah, the Halloween sex definitely has some creative decisions. You know,
So, not my intention, but that's where she went with it.
hey, that's the beauty of these. You never know where you're going to detour, which is always sort of it can be both exciting and terrifying at the same
Exactly.
time. Um, Andrew, before we wrap up here, um, I'd always like to do this thing whenever talking about Halloween as a lightning round, and
Okay.
just sort of ask you, sort of top of mind, favorite this, favorite that. So I mean, again, you are stuck to these answers for life. Let me just say that. No, it's okay. People don't harass him on Twitter. Please send the angry comments my way. So, uh, favorite version of the shape,
Halloween 1.
favorite mask,
Also Halloween 1.
favorite side character.
Kathleen Kenmont and Halloween 4.
Oh, very cool. Most memorable kill.
Ooh, that is a tough one.
This one always stumps people.
Yeah, that requires a bit of thought, actually.
We could circle back to it.
Okay, let's circle back to that one.
A 2018 Lori or a 1998 Lori?
2018,
Favorite film besides the original?
Season of the Witch.
Oh, okay. Like that. Like that. Favorite Dr. Loomis?
I mean, the original. Are you asking film or different actor?
Film.
Okay, we'll go with 1978.
Okay. Uh, favorite director?
Besides
But
Carpenter,
yeah, we sort of had to put Carpenter over to
okay,
the side. Yeah.
Dwight Little.
Okay. I was going to say that because, and this might be a hot take, I think of all the directors besides Carpenter, he is the only person to actually get Halloween.
I agree with you. I think that he understood the nostalgic fall Midwest American elements. And I did discuss that a little bit in the book. You know,
Mhm.
the contrast between four and five is that we go from fall nights in the middle of America to European Gothic.
Yeah,
And it's a huge culture shock for a lot of fans.
it is definitely jarring.
But Dwight Little, he understood the assignment absolutely. So I will agree with your statement there. I think you're right.
And you had actually mentioned that you are from Ohio,
Mhm.
and so you're sort of right there in the Midwest. Do you feel an extra special kinship to this series being kind of in the heartland?
I do. When I walk out this time of year, you know, it's starting to get a little bit colder out. Soon it's going to be getting darker earlier. When I walk outside my house this time of night, I feel like I'm in Haddonfield, and I appreciate that. I'm in the suburbs, you know, it's quiet. I'm not completely out in the boondocks the way that other people are close to me are, but I'm not in the city either. I'm in the quiet suburbs in between the rural and city areas, and feels like Haddonfield.
Watch out for the shrubs and shadows on the lawn.
Yes.
So we'll circle back to it. Favorite or most memorable kill?
I think we have to go with Halloween H2O, Adam Arkin's death.
That is pretty classic.
Yeah, that's a I don't think it can be topped.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, I like that. I respect that. I'm an oldie, but the death of Bob in the first one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost a cliche to say it at this point, but there's just something iconic with the head tilt and
I
again the breathing.
I gave so many 1978 answers that I felt like I should veer away.
That's fine. Gotta save it for another time.
But yeah, I mean, the 1978 Halloween is a perfect horror film. Can't go
Oh,
wrong with it.
it's my favorite. It's my favorite slasher. I mean, in a world without the Dark Knight, and I've said this before on the show, Halloween would be number one. Like it's that high up on the ladder for me. I just
Yeah.
adore this film and this franchise, as you can probably tell.
Makes two of us.
There we go. That's right. Uh, well, Andrew, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and having a chance to have this discussion and talking with us about your book. Is there anything else before I let you go that you sort of feel encapsulates all your feelings about the Halloween series and writing this book?
This book was my love letter to the franchise, a franchise that I fell in love with at the age of 7 or maybe 8. Memory's a little foggy there, but a very young age that I watched in theaters as a teenager, that I watched in theaters as an adult, that I've now watched with my sons now that they're older, and I've streamed the new films at home. Halloween has been a part of my life for 3 decades. This book is my love letter to that. It's that's the simplest way that I can put it. I am a fan. I wrote it for fellow fans, and I tried to capture as many stories of the people who brought these films that I love to light. I hope that people who might not like a particular film go to the chapter about that film, read some of the interviews, and maybe they give it another chance, whether that's Resurrection or one of the Rob Zombie movies or even Ends. I've got interviews on all those. Check out the stuff you don't like first. Maybe it might change your mind.
Well, I will tell you in that spirit because I did find your stuff on the Rob Zombie films to be, uh, in a lot of ways, the most insightful because it's so fresh in a lot of ways. It's so far removed from the Blumhouse trilogy. It's not as sort of far back, as the originals, but there's sort of that. in between, there's the
Mhm.
some growing nostalgia, but also some uh, revisions and second looks at it. And hearing that you watched Halloween 2 4 nights in a row, you have at least inspired me to give that another look at this Halloween season. So I will definitely be checking out that film again, and I'll circle back with you my thoughts and notes afterwards.
Let me know. I'm very curious to hear how you feel about the film, revisiting it. But I'll leave you with this. I believe that Rob Zombie pioneered what they now call elevated horror with his Halloween 2. Something Scout and I talked about in the book. She agreed with that notion, but I think he kicked off a trend that didn't have a name yet, that now is a very common phrase within the horror community.
Well said. And I think that is a perfect way to end this discussion and certainly get a lot of people talking and buzzing. But the book, everybody, for those of you watching, it is Horror in Haddonfield, The Untold Stories of Halloween by Andrew Grevas. Andrew, this was an absolute delight and a pleasure. Where can people stalk you in the best possible way on social media?
I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky, and then I also have a Facebook account at Andrew Grevas on all three. I also have Horror and Haddonfield accounts on all three of those platforms as well. But if you follow me on one, I pretty much post the same thing on all three.
And tell us, where can people pick up a copy of this book?
If you order it on Amazon, it'll be to your house in a few days.
All right, perfect, everybody. Definitely go check this out. And again, this is not just me doing a pitch here. I thoroughly enjoy this. Again, for everybody watching, you can see my notes and whatnot written inside. The book is dog-eared, and I just had an absolute blast reading it. And having this discussion with you, man, has been a real treat. No tricks, no, plenty of
No
treats.
tricks. I,
Uh,
I
yeah,
really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
absolutely. Well, everybody, that does it for me today. Thank you again to Andrew. Again, the book is Horror in Haddonfield, The Untold Stories of Halloween. Check it out this Halloween season. On that note, everybody, I will be back next week where we will do this all over again for the love of movies.
Still at the movies makes every movie a treat.